Hello, good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to this evening's BIC Streams session, Quoting an Alternative Mediation, Mindfulness and Healing with Non-Judgmental Justice. To lead us through this evening's conversation, we are glad to have with us today lawyer and co-founder of Arna Law, Kamala Naganand, and we have with us a distinguished and versatile lawyer and the father of mediation in India. Drumroll, please, Mr. Sriram Panchu. The full bios of both the speakers will appear in the chat box on the bottom of your Zoom screens. If you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen as well, which is next to the chat. Do follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget to sign up to our mailing list on our website. And with this, over to you, Kamala.
Thank you, Lekha. Good evening and welcome to all of you. Sriram has been one of the pioneers of the mediation movement in India. He is the face of mediation in India. He started his career in the chambers of Mr. Govind Swaminathan and has had a distinguished career at the bar. He was designated senior by the Madras High Court in 1996, and he has mediated significant public disputes from the Ayodhya dispute to the 60-year-old border dispute between the state of Assam and Nagaland. He's mediated commercial matters, family disputes, and has taught across universities around the world on mediation. He's also written many books, and in 2018, he was conferred by the Lawyers of India honor and designation by the Bar Council of India. So welcome, Sriram, to our conversation this evening. I'd like to start by, at the very beginning of your career, and ask you, how did mediation interest you? And may I request you to start by sharing with us your journey in the law, and also side by side parallel it with the mediation journey of India.
Thank you, Kamala. And thank you for the Bangalore International Center for having me here. It's a pleasure to be with you. Much as I enjoy the flexibility of the online world, there are times when I miss not having to see, not having actually meet people face to face. And this is one of those, because I think I've seen a lot of friends this evening. But thank you for inviting me. My journey, yes. I started my practice of law in 1976 with, as you said, Mr. Govind Swaminathan. It took me about 15 years in my profession to realize that something was wrong. And I had a growing sense of dissatisfaction with the way that the law was impacting the lives of my clients who were litigating. But invariably, their lives got worse. Even if they won their cases, their lives got worse. The relationships got worse. The problems with their companies or their got worse. And it just didn't seem to be, something which served people well in that part of the law, the conflict area. Anyway, I used to do a lot of public interest cases. I've always matched, added stuff onto a conventional law practice. My conventional practice is commercial and constitutional law, but I've always added other things. So I used to do a lot of public interest cases. And in 1991, Dr. M.S. Swaminathan proposed me for the Salzburg Institute, the Salzburg Seminar. And for those of you who haven't been or don't know about it, I would suggest you check it out. It's a fantastic, multidisciplinary gathering which takes place in Salzburg. They run something like 12 seminars a year on different subjects, ranging from philosophy to politics to law to journalism. And each of the seminars is you have about 30 people who are mid-career working in that field, and you have a few acknowledged leaders in that field. And they throw them all together for 2 weeks. There is just one formal lecture in the beginning, and after that, it's just discussion. It is the most energizing experience I've ever seen. It's, of course, in a beautiful setting. It's the same castle where they shot the film The Sound of Music. But as an experience, I think the Salzburg seminar has rarely left people's lives untouched. Most people who've gone there have had a significant change, in their lives. I wish somebody would start something like that in India. But anyway, the subject I went for was harmonizing environment and development. I didn't know anything called mediation existed before. But Lawrence Susskind and Chris Moore, from the United States, taught that one method of harmonizing environment and development was mediation. That with this, you could address conflict between disputants and work out ways in which both could come together to an agreement, which would be significantly better than an adversarial result. For me, this was my eureka moment. This is when the penny dropped into the slot, and I said, my God, this is it. This is what I've been looking for this method, this process, which will handle personal and civil conflict, commercial conflict. And for me, then on, it's been a very clear thing that the law is twofold. One part of the law, the adversarial system, must take care of cases of criminal law, cases of constitutional law, cases where you need an interpretation of a court or a direction of the court, and cases of severe imbalance, social impact cases. Everything else, I think, should go to mediation, or in some cases to arbitration, because it's much better resolved there. And so my work has been on that on that line. From then, I came back to India and I started to speak and write about mediation. And for a few years, there was a lot of confusion. A lot of my friends thought I was going into meditation. There was this, why is Sriram going into deep breathing and pranayama? And this continued for some time, but I persisted. Cases would come. I would ask the lawyer for the other side. I would say that there is this thing called mediation. Why don't we try it? And I would convert them to mediation. We would sit and mediate cases, and we started to get some interesting results. In 2001, my journey took me to New York. NYU invited me to teach a course in public interest law. And I agreed to go, provided I could do my research on mediation. And they, of course, they said yes, and they opened out all doors to me. So it was a very fruitful year teaching. I came back, and in 2005 was, I think, the Victor Hugo moment. There's nothing so powerful as an idea whose time has come. Following a conversation with Justice Kaju, was Chief Justice at Madras, and I said, this is what mediation could do. But that man had the vision to say, we will introduce it as a regular part of the court. We'll create a mediation center and make it a division of the High Court. And he said, I'll give you rooms, I'll give you staff, I'll send you cases. I have no funds, will you manage? And I said, of course we will. So we took it up. We went up to lawyers, good lawyers, asked them to come and train as mediators. We brought in a first-class trainer from the US to train them. Our dining tables went to the High Court to become mediation tables. But we started. And, a lot depends upon your initial successes. And we had two initial successes. One I'll tell you about later. But the big one really was the case of Standard Motors, where a dispute which was lying in court for 12 years got sent down to mediation. Standard Motors, the company which made the Herald car, the company was wound up in '94, the assets had been sold. But for 12 years, the banks and the workers' unions were fighting about sharing the proceeds. The banks wanted 45 crores, the workers wanted 25. It was only 50 crores. And the money got just lying in court. 2006, June, a judge said, why don't we try this mediation? So they sent it down. In 3 months, we got a result. Wow. The banks came down from 45 to 30 crores. I remember that evening, at 4:30, I spoke with these bankers. And I said, look, if you're going to fight for 45 crores, and this is the thing about mediation, you must bring home to them your alternatives to settlement. I said, if you don't settle, you are looking at easily 12 years more of litigation. And God knows what the law will be at that time. You will not be on rank on par with the workers. I said, if you settle today, today is 15 September, I will see that you get your money by the end of the month. And your half-yearly accounts. Your half-yearly accounts are good times to tell bankers to accept money and close. So they looked at me and they said, do you promise? I said, yes, I promise. Who was I to promise? But there's a God above. I said, yes, I promise. And within half an hour, they got back and said, yes, we agreed. So they signed, the workers came down from 25 to 20, that wasn't the problem. And we had a lovely function in the Madras High Court, and the Chief Justice distributed the checks to the families of workers. And you know how many there were? There was 2,196 workers.
Wow.
That number will never, go from my mind. In some cases, they died, the children came forward to receive the checks. And this made news. And then President Kalam, Mr. Kajal told him about the center. And the president actually wanted to come and visit. We were a one-year-old center. No president of India ever visits a one-year-old center. And when we got this news, I was surprised. I called his office and I said, is this for real? And his secretary said, no, sir, it's for real. He wants to come. His father was a mediator in their village. The president wants to see the center. So he came, and there is nobody, I think, the grace of God in a man as Dr. Kalam. You can see that photograph at the back. And he came and he blessed it. And I think that made that just grow, it just grew exponentially. And we had a wonderful committee set up for the Supreme Court. Justice Lokur did a lot of work for that committee to take it all India. And within a short space, 15 years, you have mediation centers in every high court, district courts, and of course the Supreme Court. You have thousands of mediators. You have lakhs of cases being mediated across the entire spectrum of personal and commercial and civil conflict. So for India, I think it's been a great mediation march. Having said that, this is stage one. Stage two is the need to professionalize the practice, to bring in private mediation. Because it's only that way that mediation actually becomes sustainable, not just through court mediation, which is pro bono or honorarium. So we're working on that, how to professionalize it, how to make it remunerative and attractive for the mediator, but also for the lawyer. We need to create systems by which lawyers have a financial incentive to help parties to settle cases.
Sriram, may I request you to hold that thought for a moment?
Yes.
I want to go back to the case of that you just mentioned, and I'd like for you to share with us the most humanizing aspects of mediation as a form of dispute resolution. Can you share with us one or two examples where you've seen healing, where you've seen forgiveness, where you've seen empathy? These are the bottom line of any dispute resolution mechanism, because when you are in an adversarial system, what you end up seeing is only the negativity. But in order for any dispute to heal completely and to be cathartic, it needs healing, it needs forgiveness. So would you be able to share with us maybe another one or two examples of your experience?
I think, Kamala, the entire process is one of, it's a human process. Because what do you do in mediation? You get people to communicate to each other. You get them to listen to each other. You get them to try and understand each other. You open up the framework, the larger picture, so that it's not just a disputant. You said, there is, in your session today, you use the word mindfulness. You get them to be mindful of the fact that in that dispute, there's not just themselves. There's also the community. There's also a family. There are also others. And they must be taken into account. That there is a long-term vision to things. That there are generations who matter. And then you actually get them involved in looking for solutions.
which is the most amazing thing, right? That they are part of.
That they get part of the process to resolve their own dispute. So let me give you a couple of examples quickly. I did a mediation some time back for a very large educational chain. Of course, I won't take names, but it consisted of father and sons, four sons, and one son, and the rest of the family had fallen out. And it was very bitter. And there are all kinds of cases, trust and criminal cases and civil cases, very, very bitter. And it came to the High Court, and Chief Justice Kaul told them, he said, look, if you continue litigating, in 20 years' time, you would have destroyed your institute, not 20 years. He said, in a short span of time, you will destroy your institution. You may fight for 20 years, but your institution will go very soon. He said, I'll give you a mediator, you try. It took me 8 months. Mediation is not easy. It's not easy. It can be very difficult because essentially you have no power with you. As a judge, you have the power. As a mediator, you have one power, which is to change the way people think, to think about themselves and a dispute. But some cases take a long time. This one took me 8 months. But at the end of it, we got a result where this young man said, I will leave the others, will be where they are. And the others decided to support him in another venture, non-competing. And today they're both flourishing. But earlier they spent all their time in courts of laws, cursing each other. Today they're flourishing. And I keep visiting them. And when I visit, I would say, how are you doing? And they would say, yes, we're doing well. Recently, this is what I hear. They not only tell me that, each one says, I'm doing well, but they also say, sir, the other branch is doing well. And, that is something which you get in mediation. I mean, it's, to me, having people sign an agreement, shake hands, and after shaking hands, an elder brother, a younger brother falling at the feet of the elder brother, or these two brothers hugging each other, or friends treating each other like, people who've fallen out, saying, we started our journey together in the 90s and we've fallen apart. Now let's get back together. This is common stuff. It's not at all unusual to me when I have people who I would say the sheer human aspect that we've fallen into conflict. Now we can emerge from it. And having emerged, we can go back to being whole again and go back to being friends again. I had people from Coimbatore with me the other day. They were in a dispute for 12 years. The company law board sent them for resolution. They started at 11. By 2 o'clock, they were on the hunt for alternatives. By 5 o'clock, they had fashioned the essence of an agreement. By 7, they had decided. By 8, they had signed the agreement. They started at 11 in the morning. By 8 o'clock, they had reached the agreement, signed it. And then each of them started making frantic phone calls. And I said, who are you calling? They said, we're calling our children because although we've been fighting, our children stay best of friends. And they'll be the happiest people to know that this has happened. We are calling our respective children. I see this all the time in a mediation practice. I see the most humanizing elements of people coming out from there and humanizing and leading them to, the best of solutions. I could go on. I could take the whole evening and give you, case after case after case. But shall I give you one case which never goes away from my mind? This was the very first case in our mediation center, which succeeded. This was a case of a contractor who had built a house, and there were disputes between him and the owner. And the owner wasn't paying the contractor's claim, and it came to mediation. It took about, I think, 3 or 4 sessions. And they came to an agreement, and the agreement was signed, and the check was handed over. And the minute the check was handed over, the contractor's wife, she used to come with him. She took me aside and said, sir, I have something to tell you. And I said, yes. And she said, my husband suffers from a serious disease, and we need this money for his treatment. And She said, we didn't want to say that in negotiation because then, you know, the other side might think it as a bargaining advantage. But now we have the check, I can tell you this. And I will never forget this one moment. When she left that room of that mediation center, that's our hall number 1, it's called mediation hall number 1. She turned around and she said, sir, I want to tell you, this is no ordinary room. It is a house of God. You know, whatever doubts I may have had that mediation will take root, just got dispelled in that flash of that moment. I just knew there's no way this is not going to take root. House of God, you know, what can you not do with it? So we still have that room. It's the most cherished room for mediation in the country. Every visitor comes and says, oh, is this where it all started?
How lovely. Thank you for sharing. One of the criticisms that mediation has faced in recent times is that it has the potential to, people believe, entrench existing power imbalances like gender, employment, society between parties, and that mediation works best when equals are bargaining with one another. How would you react to this? And what can a mediator do to smooth over these imbalances?
But firstly, I would say you never get two equals. You know, you always get people, but with differing strength. But that's not really the point. I think the point is this, that you will get power imbalances in negotiating parties. And this arises out of the circumstances of the case. Bear in mind that those power imbalances will get reflected in a court also. You know, because the same power imbalance of, you know, money and position will bear out in, let's say, in choice of a lawyer, you know, getting a better lawyer. You get a power imbalance there as well. So I say, to some extent, you can handle the power balance in a mediation. And I think it is a duty of a mediator to handle that power balance. There are different schools of mediation. One is a school which says the mediator just runs the process. There is another school which says the mediator does more. You know, he gets involved in the search for a good result. I belong to that latter school. And I do not believe in letting an unfair agreement go through my hands. There are times when I've told a party, look, the other side is willing for this, but I don't think this is fair, so I'm going to cancel this mediation unless you behave a little more reasonably. And invariably, they've said, yes, not to worry, sir, you tell us what it should be and we'll go by that. So I believe a mediator can, you know, handle to some extent the imbalance, can certainly make sure that parties treat each other equally. That's very important. A mediator can make sure that parties treat each other equally, are given the same amount of respect, and can, in some ways, you know, subtly alter the balance a bit. After all, when you have private conversations with each party, I do tell the stronger party, you know, I do climb down them a little bit to say, you can twist the arm gently. You know, as a lawyer, you can say, you know, in the mediation, you do tell parties, you know, you may not have the best case in the world. And I might spice that up a bit when I speak to a stronger party. So you bring that down a bit. But that's only up to a degree. Beyond a degree, you don't mediate those cases of power imbalance. I'd not suggest that you mediate a case, you know, where you have a dominant husband and a battered wife. No. You don't mediate a case where a company is like piling on all its, forces against one worker. You send those to a court of law, and you hope that in that court of law there is a judge who knows that he must constitutionally use his corrective sword, you know, to rectify injustice. We can't rectify injustice here in mediation, but a judge can. So we must know when to send those cases off to the court.
Lovely. On that note, I'd like to move to, you know, public mediation in India. You've been part of several public mediations. So what do you think is the scope of public mediation in this world of constant conflict? And how effective has mediation been in resolving issues of public and national importance?
I think the term constant conflict that you use is right. This is a world of constant and heightened conflict. You get in all parts of the globe, you get it increasing, and because the communication systems are so good, conflict just streams in at you, from wherever and whichever parts of the globe. So really conflict is so present and so strong a part of our lives. And every conflict, cries out for good resolution. Because when you start this search for saying, what are the commonalities? What are the larger interests out there? What things are more important to people? Then the answers you get will point you to the direction of conciliation, reconciliation, harmonizing, consensus, settlement. Because only through these that you can build better societies. And then you will know that there are ways, of tackling differences. When I come, I'll give you an example later when I talk about the Assam-Nagaland dispute. But I think there is one thing which is, you see, the old days, we had people, we had politicians, we had leaders who knew how to build bridges. Their strength lay in the power to build bridges and to harmonize and to reach across. Today, you find today's leaders' strength lies in dividing people. And that is a huge problem for society. Question, therefore, is can the court come in there? Is there a role for the court where the court can say we have a public dispute in front of us, we're going to mandate mediation? And to say that we will appoint a mediator, we will structure the process, we will oversee it, like the Supreme Court did in Ayodhya. And I think there is a role for the court. There is certainly a role, it's crying out there, there is a role for the court. Ayodhya was a bold start. I mean, it's very unusual that you would experiment with something by taking the ultimate case for experimentation. Yes. Although I wouldn't say it was the first time. And in the earlier cases, Assam and Nagaland, it was an earlier case. But I think there is a role for the court. There is certainly a need for both institutional bodies and citizen movements to work toward the area of harmonizing differences. It's not just institutional bodies like the court. We do need citizen movements also, which say that we press, we are keen to find resolution. We are keen that warring groups should come together, and we urge everybody to do that and to actively work towards that end.
Thank you for bringing Ayodhya up, because that was going to be my next question. You've had the rich experience of mediating Ayodhya. What are your learnings and experience of mediating that dispute?
Ayodhya is a fascinating case to mediate. Every mediator in the world is jealous of me because I got Ayodhya. I mean, it has everything in it. It has history. It has law. It has religion. It has court cases. It has violence. It has the huge communities of the world, battling each other. It had everything, every element of conflict. So to be given the great good fortune to be part of a mediation effort is, I think, a blessing of the Almighty. And for me, it was an amazing experience. I'm bound by confidentiality, in matters, so I cannot divulge what happened in mediation proceedings. There's much that I cannot talk about, but at this I can say that my principal takeaway from Ayodhya is that, and this is not just from the mediation itself, it is from reading about Ayodhya from the time it started, is that when a public dispute breaks out, the most strongest voices are those on the margins, or on the extremes. It is the extremist view which commands the most attention because their voices are the loudest, the most strident, and their acts can be negative, and all this grabs attention. This marginalizes people in the middle. It is the people in the middle who will be the larger number, who want a consensus, who want a solution, who want to move on, who don't want this to break society. But they get lost or marginalized, or they get shouted down or threatened, and some of them have to move towards the extreme ends. So I find that my conclusion is that if one has to deal with public conflict well, we must, as a country, build up that energizing, harmonizing voice in the middle. We must create the power of the commons, the people who say, no, we are one country, we want to find a resolution. If you are our leaders, find it for us. And I know this for a fact that if there had been that kind of groundswell of opinion, then a very wise leader of the Muslim Personal Law Board in the 80s, who advocated a form of a peaceful resolution, would have had his way. And he would have been, he would have been met on the other side by wise Shankaracharyas. And the two of them together would have had their way to find a good resolution. Instead of which it went into the hands of those who were more on the extreme margins. So this is my huge learning from Ayodhya. And from this is born the desire to work towards, creating a center for moderating dialogue. More on that later.
So what, in your opinion, should be, or what do you think our leaders today, both in government, in bureaucracy, should be thinking about and of incorporating mediation? How do you think that, they could bring mediation into the mainstream?
Well, I would think that if I was given charge of a blueprint for mediation, I would do the following. I would recognize that mediation has come center stage. I would recognize that the only way in which I can salvage the legal system is to create that center space for mediation, to professionalize mediation, to infuse its practice, incentivize it, and see to it that personal, commercial, civil, property conflict went off the courts and onto mediation tables. I would keep the courts for public, for constitutional cases, for interpretation of statutes, and for directions. I would also make the courts focus on cases of corruption. Corruption, not your bus conductor corruption, but corruption of senior most leaders. I would make the courts focus on that, and I would make the courts focus on serious crime like hate crimes and murders. And I would say that the courts got to these cases quickly enough. And if you move, the mass of commercial personal conflict off the courts can get to these cases quickly enough. Having done that, I think this would be a place where you start. This would be a place where you start. And then I would view the court really, as, for me, the court is a protector of the Constitution. I don't see the court's role so much in resolution of private conflict. When the court gets into private conflict, I feel our adversarial systems would make more damage than anything else. But to me, the court's primary role is a protector of the Constitution. We are an amazing country. We are a country which has the most wonderful constitution in the world. And that constitution is our Bible, is our Gita, is our Quran in our public space. In our private spaces, we have our religions, our respective religions. But in the public space, we have only one religion, and that is the Constitution. And we are marvelously lucky to have such a wonderful Constitution, which has every humane and civilized aspect in it, which has our freedoms and protections, our fundamental rights, our duties, our checks and balances. So, for citizens to swear allegiance to the Constitution and for the court to be seen as its ultimate protector is where I would like the system to go. And I would like to see cases of conflict being ironed out in a far more humane way. I think it's entirely doable. Nothing of this is asking for the moon. It's entirely doable, and it's doable within a short span of time.
Thank you. The Assam and Nagaland dispute was another significant, sensitive matter that you mediated. Can you share with us that experience and again the outcomes and learnings from that?
Yeah, I spent close to 2 years in that dispute, 2010 to 2012. I never been to Northeast before, and that took me almost every 3 weeks, 3 days in a week, 2 weeks. I was in Guwahati or Dimapur or somewhere in that. It is amazing because it was a 60-year-old dispute over their entire border between Assam and Nagaland, stretching 500 miles, square kilometers, in 7 districts. And they had fought over this from the 1960s and had lost hundreds of lives. And they had a case in the court pending from 1988. And when it came to hearing, Justice Kadru again, he said, what is the point? We will decide for one state against the other, and you will keep fighting, and there will be violence. We'll give you a mediator, you try. So one thing I found was a willingness to engage in mediation. Just the fact that, we could get people to talk was enough for people on the ground, to give them a sense of hope and say, let's not engage in any fighting. There is some effort to speak. There was a willingness on the part of the administrators, the willingness on the part of the chief ministers. They actually wanted a resolution. And at one point, maybe we could have had a resolution in terms of, exchange of some territory, plus some very innovative methods, because ultimately these are two, states within a union. These are not two different countries. And one thing I found in the Assam Nagaland case, which is a classic mediation lesson, this is the story of the orange. The two girls fight over an orange, and a judge will say, well, I'll look into law and I'll see where did this tree grow, in which of your parents' compounds, and where was the overhang, and I'll decide who owns the orange. And an arbitrator will say, well, maybe I'll give you 50-50. But a mediator will ask the question, he will say, why do you need the orange? And because they're talking to the mediator in trust, they will open up. And one girl just might say, I need it to make juice. And the other might say, I need the skin to make marmalade. And therefore you have a solution where you can give both of them the maximum. It's one thing, these creative out-of-the-box solutions, then you get plenty of them in mediation. When you actually get people talking as to why they want something, you will very often find that one person wants something for one reason and the other wants it for another reason. And this translates all the time. I've seen couples coming to mediation and the husband saying, I won't give up this house, it's my family property. Because when he says, I won't give up the house, you say, why? He says, my family property. And you ask the wife, why do you want this house? And she says, I need it to stay and for the children to go to school. They're completely different reasons as to why two people want the same thing. But once you know that, you can craft, answer. So go back to Assam and Nagaland, and you discover that one side wants the land because they cannot be seen as having given it up politically. And the other side wants the land because they want to use it. So these are completely, different reasons. And we have enough in our constitution in the 5th and 6th schedule, which could have helped us to create councils which will satisfy the needs of both sides. But the whole of Assam got locked into a huge conflict because of a conclave exchange between India and Bangladesh. And therefore, for reasons out of our control, we found we couldn't proceed, with land issues. But what we did do, which again is interesting, is we created border peace committees comprised of Assamese and Nagas in each district. And we kind of empowered them and, made sure they were recognized and given a car with a flag and all kinds of amenities. And these committees, have been so useful that whenever some issue breaks out, they get to the site of the clash and they diffuse it because they're both Assamese and Nagas and respected people in these committees. And they have kept the peace. I've rarely heard of a border clash over the last so many years. So I think when you empower people, you energize them, you infuse them, you'll get results.
And it's also a question of justice in their hands, right? They are the ones who are facilitating the outcome. And they are the ones who are negotiating it, accepting it, and sharing it with their community. And I feel like, in the courts, of course, courts definitely have a place for it, but in certain instances, it really is finding a creative solution amongst parties. And the more that it's done by these individuals themselves, the higher the chances of it being accepted on both sides, implemented, and continue to maintain good relationships.
Yeah, right.
So, in hindsight, what role do you think mediation could have played to resolve complex historic conflicts such as the Kaveri dispute between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu?
Well, it may not be just hindsight. I don't think that conflict has gone away anywhere. So you could very well have that back on a mediation table at some stage. But I think it is this. I think it is to engage people on the ground from both the states, especially people who are affected by this and people who are knowledgeable. And I know that years back, there was an effort in the direction. Farmers from Tamil Nadu were engaged with farmers in Karnataka in sitting down and seeing how this could be resolved. And there was a very good monograph brought out on that. And to anybody who's interested in looking at the Kaveri dispute, I would suggest please read that monograph. It's authored by S. Gohan, and it gives you very interesting insights on how you can actually resolve it. And what it proposes is to say, let's change the model from sharing in terms of TMC, volume, to sharing in terms of percentages. So that when we have problems, we share in terms of percentages. One side is not totally deprived. It's a very interesting module. But it is a case, and once you go through that process, I think then people on both sides emerge with a better understanding of each other. Till then, it's all about demonizing the other. You want to make us starve. You want to ask our ground to run dry. But when you get understanding, then you get this thought that maybe we should find some things which suit both of us. Which is the only way. I cannot think of any other way. What other way would you have to find answers?
Thank you. Thank you for that. Can we now move to a more international perspective? In 2019, over 45 member states of the United Nations, including India, Iran, Israel, and the United States, came together to sign the Singapore Mediation Convention. How significant a development is this?
I think it's a huge development. The Singapore Convention is called the UNCITRAL Convention on Enforcement of International Mediation Settlement Agreements. Now, this basically provides that if you have a mediation settlement between a person or entity of one country and one of another, an Indian company, an American company, for example, that agreement is enforceable and has a strength is enforceable and has a strength of virtually of a decree of court. So you can take it to any country which is a signatory to the convention, file it, and say, I want it to be enforced. And you don't have to go through the process of filing another suit all over again. The court will take it as though it is a full-fledged decree and send it on to enforcement. And as you know, for a mediation agreement, there is no defense. You cannot reopen it on a question of fact. There are no defenses to somebody who signed a mediation agreement, and the court will not entertain a defense. So it is virtually automatic implementation and enforcement, which is something business people don't have in adversarial litigation nor in arbitration. Sometimes the bigger headaches start after they have an award in their hand and they go to try to implement it. But the mediation, you have no backstops. So this answers, in fact, the one need of business to say, we have a mediation agreement, how do we enforce it? The Singapore Convention now gives you a brilliant method of enforcement.
What is the scope of mediation in international matters when countries are at loggerheads and the ramifications of their disputes are far-reaching?
I think there is a scope, but it has to come. You see, in all mediations, you have to get a mediation panel appointed by somebody either the parties themselves appoint a mediator, or it is a body like the court which appoints a mediator. So I think, in fact, I think the United Nations was to engage in forming a mediation force, that the UN has a peacekeeping force. If the UN actually, formed a mediation group and lent the services of this group to countries engaged in conflict, so that it would be perceived as a neutral group, backed by, the power, the authority of the UN, the moral authority of the UN, I think it goes a significantly long way. Because at the end of the day, when people get locked into conflict, they get locked into it, they respond to things which are happening, there is violence, there is counter-violence, sometimes it goes out of the hands of leaders, and then it's a massacre, it's flames all over, they don't know what to do themselves, it's a slippery slope. And therefore, the UN said, we will actually, we can mandate, we can suggest a mediation, we can send you the people, you can start with it. It provides a way out for the leadership, and it provides a calming influence on ground.
Thank you. So in the last 5 years, we've seen that there have been a lot of private mediation institutes that have come out all over India. What, according to you, is the role of an institution in the mediation process? Does it play as significant a role as the mediator himself?
I think the roles are different. The institution is meant to, to make the mediation more, to run it more conveniently, to administer it, to bring, to have a set of rules, but to enhance the quality of the mediation, the process. The institution may have mediators on its roll, so people could go and say, look, give us the mediator from your list. Or the institution can serve to bring, to have independent mediators, but offer its facilities. It may have rules. One thing it can do is to structure the fee system, so that if you have a standard fee system, people feel more relaxed with that. And also to keep a check on, whether mediations are really running into too long sessions, to keep a check on time. So these are useful things that institution can do. And it is good to have institutions, because then that will, I think, give people more confidence in approaching mediation.
Thank you, Sriram. I'd now like to move to private mediation and look at, commerce and industry. With most large businesses being family run in India, when there is a shareholder dispute, like the one between Tatas and the Mistries, do you think that mediation could play a role in conflict resolution?
I certainly think so. And I certainly it's something which should be tried before people, go to litigation. Or even if they had to go to litigation, you get your interim order necessary, then go to mediation. Because, the toxic effect of dispute gets multiplied when it's a family business. Because then things are not just boardroom, it is boardroom and living room, and it's members of family. And sometimes it's not just members of family, it's members of a community. I think the Tata's Mistries fight was disaster. It was disaster for the two groups, the Tatas and the Mistries. It was disaster for the number of companies, which even saw, I think, independent directors taking, some sides, taking sides with Ratan Tata, some with sides with Mistry. And it was disaster for the community. A community which prided itself on having the Tatas, as their foremost kind of emblematic, iconic figures, I think just got shattered. And not just the community, so do the rest of us. We've always given the Tatas a certain primacy when it comes to values and humanism. And I think it was shocking for us to see, what happened in this case. Especially sad to see kind of, extra adversarial and aggressive behavior from the Tatas. It is almost as though they had left their legal department in charge of this whole dispute and said, you guys lead us. And that is disaster, because you all know what legal departments do. They're meant to, for adversarial conflict. They're not meant to give you wise leadership, not meant to give you wise guidance. A legal department in most companies is like, what did Mark Twain say? He said, if your only tool is a hammer, then every problem needs a nail. I know legal departments are like that. They used to be adversarial. They think everything should go to the operation table or to the surgical ward. So to have needless aggressive behavior was really sad for us. And I think they did a lot of damage. It'd been so much better if they'd gone to, and there are wise counselors they knew, they would have known, and said, help us to find a way out of this. At the end of the day, Cyrus Mistry would have known that there's no way he could hold on to chairmanship if the Tatas didn't want him. But I think what upset the man was his being asked to go in this manner. And at the end of the day, I don't think Ratan Tata wanted him out in that manner. I think something went wrong in that communication. And I'm sure if they had a chance to sit across the table, they could have rectified it. Neither of them wanted this kind of end, this kind of process, this ugly ballooning of conflict and this end. So it's a pity that they didn't go, to a resolution process. In fact, I think I would strongly advise, for large companies, please get yourselves in terms of, when you have these kind of cases, think of going to a dispute resolution advisor, who can really advise you to say, look, for this kind of dispute, try this process. And it would structure a mediation for you. We have very senior judges who are good mediators. We have other wise people who are good mediators. Get them involved. See if you can sort it out. If you can't, go to court. But try it this way first.
Thank you. I'd like to move also to the family mediation, where we're seeing that there are a lot of family disputes, not only divorce, where interests of all parties and all stakeholders have to be looked at. How do you ensure the interests of all the parties are safeguarded? I'd also like for you to please focus on children.
I think when you have family disputes or family mediation, there are two kinds. One is your, family mediation, let's say, which is having a matrimonial dispute. And I think a mediator, there must be a special regard to the plight of children. Children are the unseen parties at the table, but they are, I think, the most important parties. Beyond a certain stage, you give a damn about what husband and wife do to each other. They can run their own lives. It's the children who really affect you. So I think we caution our mediators to pay a special regard to children. I think in our processes, we must enhance that to make sure we have psychologists who take care of children's needs when their parents are going through a dispute. And every mediator, when it has a mediation result, must take care that the interests of children are protected. You cannot have a mediation agreement go through your hands where sufficient care and provision is not made for the children. When it comes to a family business, for example, the mediator should remember that there are generations here who will be impacted by this decision. And therefore, one must take care again, to provide for equity over there. I do know now that there is a practice, several people have started approaching for this, where they say, help us for succession planning. We want to do succession planning. We realize the disputes are probably, quite inherent to crop up. So help us to fashion a dispute resolution methodology. And I think that helps because if the patriarch of the company fashions the dispute succession plan and nominates a dispute resolution system, for example, nominates a mediator, then it makes it much easier when there is dispute. People can access this person instead of fighting about what to do. So wise, I think good heads of family business outfits are doing this to look to the future and set in force a dispute resolution mechanism. They're doing the wise thing of expecting dispute. Don't get surprised by dispute. Expect it, deal with it, fashion the instruments for it, then you're fine.
Thank you. I'd like to share an experience with you where I was representing one of the parties in a divorce proceeding. And it was a very long day, and we started at 9 a.m. and finished by 12 midnight. But at the end of it, what was really, really satisfying for me as a lawyer was to see that the husband and wife started having a conversation, and they left that mediation together to go and speak to their children and let them know of the outcome. And I think that has been one of the most satisfying experiences for me as a lawyer, because all interests in all parties were looked at, and there was a resolution which was amicable And people, yes, have disagreements, but they continue to live life in a more holistic, peaceful manner. And those children at the end of it didn't have to choose between their parents and could continue to have healthy relationships in their lives going forward.
That's amazing, and congratulations, because it's
Thank
not
you.
only a successful mediation outcome, you also ensured the well-being of those children's lives in terms of being able to establish and maintain contact with their respective parents freely and without having to worry. So, you virtually ensure that they're able to, develop into harmonious adults. So it's a great achievement. Congratulations.
Thank you. So, you've lent your name to so many impactful projects and had such an amazing career. What next? What are the new initiatives that you're looking at? And would you like to share some of those with us?
Yes, I would like to. Thank you for this question. I'd like to share with you three initiatives. And this is born out of a small group of us. This is headed by Justice M.N. Venkatachalaya, our former Chief Justice, who's our Bhishma Pitama, and Justice T.S. Thakur, one of our most respected Chief Justices, Justice Ravindra and myself, and Mr. Sadish Pai. We've created a body called the Mediation Promotion Trust. The work of this body is to create new initiatives in mediation. Now, this body is going to create two new initiatives, and very briefly, I'll tell you about them. One is a Center for Mediation Studies and Research, which will look at existing, trends, identify long-term trends, look at new areas of mediation, extension of existing areas, go into the world of business, go into, world of government, using mediation for government, and fostering research and writing. Right now, we are full up because the Bar Council asked for our help in formulating the mediation component of a full-scale 45-hour semester program for the law schools. And the Chief Justice is urging that mandated that should be compulsory now. And they've asked for our help in formulating that. And I have a wonderful team which works on that. Lots of good people. I wish I had the time to name all of them, but so we're formulating that program. And the Bar Council also said, will you help us to train the teachers for it? And the rash moment, I said, yes. And then I asked them, I said, how many teachers? And they said, sir, 1,200 law schools.
Oh, wow.
So, but it's feasible, We have online processes now, and we have excellent mediators in all the states, most states. So it's not a problem at all. We'll get them together to administer the teaching. So this is a Center for Mediation Studies and Research. The other institution which we're starting under this is a Center for Moderating Dialogue. And this is squarely what I told you about my experience in Ayodhya. That there is a need for a group of people to foster this dialogue, to focus on it, to encourage writing, research, thinking, speeches, TV programs, but to keep the need for moderating dialogue foremost in the public mind, to give the possibilities of dialogue and resolution, and to actively, concretely push for it. It needs work, it needs action, it needs momentum. Edmund Burke said this in the 1700s, he said, all that is necessary for forces of evil to triumph is that the good do nothing. So all it needs for good people to get engaged in things like this and will carry the day. So this is a center for, for moderating dialogue. I hope they will, will be able to do good work. We've already been approached for some major cases of public dispute. These are two. The third is a very different kind of project. And it again takes me to the humanizing part of this program today. And this is a project called the Gratitude India Foundation. It's born out of two very simple concepts. One, how can we make gratitude a stronger and a more foundational element of our lives? And this is by, reading about it, sharing experiences, getting quotations, getting anecdotes. But along with that, to actively practice gratitude is giving. Concrete acts of giving. And we're developing a very simple mechanism, for example, an app which will help you to give at the time we are most grateful, and which is the time we have a meal. So we thank the Lord for our meal. And if we can have an app which we're developing, say, well, hit this button, and whatever money you want goes to somebody who needs a meal. Yes. And the other ways of practicing gratitude, this can grow. And we want to create a community of gratituders, of people in gratitude. And the one thing we're doing is to ensure that we raise funds separately for this body so that the donor, no part of the money given by a donor is deducted for running this organization. The entirety goes to the beneficiary. We also want to form clusters of people, who are part of this community, so that in their own area, whether it's in Bangalore, Hyderabad, or wherever, part of a company or part of a school or college group, they can say, well, here's a group of us, we'll form a cluster, we'll raise our funds, we'll find a local NGO to support, and we're happy with that. We just want to start a community, we just want to get it going. So these are 3 projects. If any of you who on this are interested, just drop me a line at srirampanchu@gmail.com. I'll make sure that somebody will get in touch with you, or if you have a chat box here, just enter your interest and your name and email. But yes, these are the 3 things I wanted to talk about. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, Sriram. I think I'll now open the floor out to some questions from our audience. Gentleman, Mr. Sunil Abrol has a question. He says, do you have to be a lawyer to be a mediator? Can it be done by someone with negotiation skills?
No, you don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be a lawyer. The fact is that lawyers are in the dispute resolution world. So they kind of, people naturally gravitate towards them for dispute. But you don't have to be a lawyer. You have accountants who are good mediators because they've dealt with people in relation to, figures and accounts and commercial disputes. You have psychologists who are good mediators in their field. You have, people in the shipping line who are very good mediators for shipping disputes. So you don't have to be a mediator. But what you should have, I think, is training to be a mediator. And this is whether you're a lawyer or a retired judge, whoever, you should have been trained to be a mediator because there is much that good training can give you. You should have an empathy with people. And I think at the bottommost, you should want to make people's lives better. So if you come in with these 3, some empathy, some training, and saying, well, I want to make this one, people's lives better, you'll be a fine mediator. I think the field will open up, As you professionalize it, it will open up. And then once it opens up and you professionalize it, then people go after the good mediators. So no, by no means are you required to be a lawyer.
And hopefully with all these training modules that you're coming out with, people who have good negotiation skills, people who do have standing in the community and gravitas would be able to come and train and then take the process of mediation forward in disputes within their localities, communities, and for the larger good. Mr. Anand Raghavan says, family disputes are on the rise. Why is mediation still not a preferred option as against court litigation?
Actually, it's starting to become a preferred option. If you look at what happens in court now, you see when mediation started, the judges would say, first they would say, what is mediation? Then after some years, they would say, why mediation in this case? Then it became, why not mediation? So mediation became the preferred option. And now the law is changing. The law is going to be that before you can launch a commercial case, you must file for mediation. So both, either a pending case in court or fresh cases, the law is going to be that, have you tried mediation? So that avenue is now very firmly and squarely going to come into the law and in its practice. That try mediation first before you proceed to litigate and destroy whatever is left of the family assets.
Thank you. Mr. Suchint Majumdar says, what is your view on the need for mediation on tax matters that are currently resolved only via administrative, example, commissioner appeals and judicial means, etc., via tribunals?
It's a very interesting question. Mediation in tax matters. At one level, very difficult because how do you where is the scope of discretion in a tax matter? The tax law has to be applied equally across. But there is one area where I think it might help, and that is in the role of settlement commissions. Where you have a large dispute, there is uncertainty on the law or on its application, and therefore it makes sense for both assessee and the state and the revenue to find an answer, to go before a settlement commission, and then for the commission to say, yes, all right, you can have an agreement that on payment of this much amount, you are saved penal provisions. That I think is a possibility. Other than that, in the normal day-to-day tax administration, I don't know about mediation because that leads to other complications. But certainly, I think settlement commission is a possibility. One other interesting example, many years back, I was doing a customs case where there was a customs prosecution launched against both a department and a law launched against a big company for some alleged offense. And I went for this hearing before this officer, and he said, "This amount is so small, Mr. Panchu, why are you fighting us like this?" I said, "I'm not fighting you because of the amount. I'm fighting you because you charge my client with, criminal intent." So he looked at me and said, "If I drop the criminal intent, will you dispute the amount?" I said, "No." He said, "You give me your word." I said, "Yes." I said, "But you have to give me your word." So we both gave each other our respective words, and that's exactly what he did. He raised the demand, but he dropped the criminal charge, and I paid it the next day. So, so yes, to answer your question, but we need to think about this.
The next question is by Varun Hemchandran. He says, online dispute resolution has been taking off lately.
Right.
States like Rajasthan, Kerala, New Delhi have slowly started running Lok Adalats and on ODR platforms as well. But when do you think the government, the largest litigator in the country, will start unclogging the courts and shifting to ODR platforms?
Well, that's a brilliant question. Government is the largest litigant by far, 48-49% is government. Government finds it very difficult to settle, although in a huge number of cases, government itself knows, the officers know that they have to settle, or that settlement is the best route. But they're forced to file appeals, all this for one reason, that no officer in government wants to take the responsibility for a settlement, because a mediation settlement inevitably involves give and take. You're taking a lot, but you're giving up some. And what they're scared of is tomorrow there will be a prosecution, there'll be investigation, there will be the three dreaded C's, the CBI, the CBC, the, what is the third one, the CAG. And they will, make this man's life miserable in his retirement. And that's a valid fear. The only way, therefore, for government to be able to engage in mediation is a proposal which I gave some time back, which in my view, I think that's the only way. It's contained in my book on mediation, the commercial mediation monograph. And basically that way is this, that we should create statutorily a very high power body to be headed by a former judge of the Supreme Court. We should staff it with whoever the revenue and the authorities want to staff it, an ex-CAG, an ex-CBC, CBC, ex-CBI, whatever. Put on it, senior secretaries to government, put some lawyers, other etc. Staff a proper body. When in disputes between government and the citizen or between companies, if there's a mediation possibility, it can be negotiated. And the draft settlement, the mediation agreement, should be taken to this body by the officers for its approval or otherwise. And this body can say, yes, we approve this, or they can say we reject it, or they can say we approve, but subject to some changes, go back and renegotiate. But once approved, that should act as immunity. It should act as immunity for the officers and no action thereafter can be taken on that case and that settlement. If government does this, you can resolve, any number of government matters across the board, whether it is banking, whether it is other disputes, tax disputes, you can resolve them by the dozens.
So how do we then build capacity within society to resolve disputes? Isn't this extremely important for a country like India, which has so much of diversity, so many religions, so many communities? How do you build
here again, I go back to what I said earlier. We are a multi-mosaic society, and this is our richness. We are not a monochrome country, one religion, one sect, one thing. We are a multi-mosaic country, multiple religions, multiple faiths, multiple denominations. That is our richness. And obviously you will have, you do have conflict, but we must realize that our supreme religion is the Constitution in the public sphere. Yes. And we must build systems and mechanisms for to be able to address conflict well. Look at that peace committee example which I gave you. You must have peace committees in every area. Look at what happened was it Hyderabad or Bangalore? Some MLA's relative posted some inflammatory post and there was violence. Bangalore, I think. Hyderabad. You should have a peace committee, get to that spot. Bangalore, I think, I'm not sure. Anyway, you should have a peace committee, get to that spot quickly and say, look, withdraw this. So we should set up institutions and mechanisms, because it's only when good people get involved can you sort things out. If you leave it to people who profit by dividing, we will get worse. We need to encourage and we need to, enthuse, and we need to bring into play people who mean well for this country, who abide by its constitution, who love the constitution, and want to live lives that way.
So do you think mediation is the idea that has come of age right now with mindfulness, awareness of mental health, awareness of questions of what is the right thing to do, instead of moving through the court process, which is a bitter journey for most people and not a satisfactory outcome? Do you think that people are now ready to move to a process of dispute resolution, which is more inclusive, which is more gentle on all parties?
You see, that's one thing. We can't do without the courts. And whenever I advocate mediation, this is never to trash the courts, because the courts are essential for the kind of work that the courts best do. And the courts have primacy in a whole lot of areas. And the court is the crucial element, as I said, for protection of our rights. So, we must keep the courts as powerful as they need to be. But I've always said a certain kind of conflict is best for mediation. And I think you're right, that realization has come very strongly. It is the judges foremost who speak pro-mediation. It is the bar which has been responsive to mediation. And it is now, with a little late start, business community is getting positive. So we will see, I think now, over the last 15 years, we've traveled a huge distance. We get visitors from abroad and they're staggered at the kind of advanced mediation is made in India. We've traveled a huge distance. There's lots more to go, but I think the trends are good, the sighting is good, and the future looks good.
Lovely. So Brian Papali asks, how does a mediator manage to remain neutral or objective during the process? Any checks and balances available?
Brian Papali is my old schoolmate, and he knows I'll ask the tricky ones. How does a mediator manage to remain neutral? It's a very good question, and it's not an easy question. It's not an easy one to answer, because you cannot always be neutral. You're not God. You do get influenced. You do get upset. There are things you think are important. When you see them being violated or rejected, you do get upset. I think awareness is important. I think you must be aware that something has disturbed your mental equilibrium. And I think once you're aware, then you bring yourself back to course. But also, I think one should not be blind to something that somebody has done wrongly. Just because I'm a mediator, it doesn't mean I should be blind to that. And I will, but in a separate session, I can well take that person apart and say, I'm sorry, but what you did was wrong. You need to compensate for that. You need to correct it. A mediator is not a soft person, mind you. We have this gentle mediator. All that is fine. But the essence of mediation is, in making people open their perspective, coming to solutions, and in that you can be quite strong as a mediator. I think also a lot depends on how much people respect you and trust you. If they give you that respect and trust, then they give you more latitude. And I think it is a trust which is really the principal factor for a mediator. Leave aside his competence, your training, your programs, what you've attended, this, that, the other. It's that quality of trust. And that quality of trust comes from your reputation, from the way you conduct your mediations, and from the way you conduct your life. You can't be one persona in a mediation room and a completely, negative person outside. But if you keep that in mind and you foster that quality of trust, then parties will give you a lot of latitude.
As a continuation to this, Koshi Thomas asks, how do you as a mediator get both the parties get the confidence of both parties? When one side feels that they are losing more than the other, how does the mediator kind of bring the flock together to sit across the table?
I think you open up the discussion, you have to get people to realize that what you're trying to get them to is a state of higher self-interest. If people think that they're giving up as a compromise, they're unhappy. But I think it's by opening the frame, that by making them look at their larger interest, the long-term vision, the lack of alternatives to settlement, that you make them realize that it's actually good for me to give up a bit here and to take this. That it's in my better interest. That is really a good mediation. Not to say that, you should compromise because a court will take you 20 years. That is no mediation in my view. But to get them a good result in the realization and the background that this is the best for me. So it's never settle for, less. When I wrote my first book, I was groping for, the title. And my sister lived in the United States. And she gave me this wonderful title. She said, settle for more. And that's mediation. It's settle for more.
Lakshmi Venkatachalam asks, that she would like to hear your views on the efficacy of mediation in international disputes. And could you also then, look at trade and the perspective of BITs and the use of mediation as a technique to resolve disputes between investors and states?
Yeah, I think it's a first-rate field, because it's very difficult otherwise for either companies in collaboration or for the investor-state disputes to get resolved. If it's an adversarial dispute between, let's say, collaborating companies, one from another country, one from India, you will spin it through the court or spin it through arbitration. That will take a long time. The relationship will go downhill. You will get a decree or an award, and then your next headache is where to implement it, because that will open up a can of legal worms there, and it will take you, multiple years of frustration to know about this is over. In a mediation, you have the opportunity to get to grips with the problem right away. And I'll give you an example. This combines with online. The other day, when I was I got a call at 8:30 in the evening saying a major contract is breaking down. What can you do? What can we do? So I said, how quickly can you assemble people? So they said, we'll do it in an hour's time. So at 9:30 in the night, I had 6 parties and 3 advisors, all from different locations, from India abroad. And we went on for 2 hours. We averted that breakdown. And over the next 4 or 5 days, they intensively sat together in mediation, and we sorted it out. That was on a Tuesday when they started. On the Sunday, that CEO called me, and he said, I cannot believe my eyes. It would have taken me this long to instruct my lawyer to send the proper notice. And we have sat down together and sat down constructively to work on this problem. And, like businessmen, and we have resolved it. He said, I don't know how much to thank you. I cannot believe what's happened. And I also told him one thing. I said, please understand that you must compensate your lawyers well. Don't treat this as a matter where it's a per day billing for your lawyer. Your lawyer shouldn't feel that he's lost out a huge case because of this mediation. He's helped you in this. So make sure you compensate him. He said, Mr. Patru, the amount of money I'm saving on this mediation, I mean, because of the mediation, my lawyer's fees are trifling. I'll do exactly as you say. Because the lawyer's fee is trifling compared to, the stakes in the mediation. But that's also important. So I think, the first effort, and you see, business people are not in the business of litigating. They are in the business of business. That's what they want to do, generate incomes, profits, make products. You give them a good way of being able to sit together and address the problem, they'll take it. They don't want to go to court as default. We ruin the system by providing an adversarial system as the first port of call. We need to change that. We are on the way of changing it.
Yeah, it's happening. Earlier, when we used to have clients coming and we talk about mediation as a process, they'd be like, what? You don't want to go and fight in court? Why? And now, when we explain to them the process and benefits, they really want to try it. So I think the attitude is changing slowly, but of course, we're not far from where we'd ideally like to be.
Yeah.
Ms. Panchu, do we need a separate act for mediation? It is a question by Advocate Raja Kumar Adukia.
Yeah, we need a separate act, and the act is coming. There's been a committee at work on it, a comprehensive act for mediation, because what there is now is scattered in multiple places, some of them contradictory. So, so full-fledged mediation act, focus on mediation, providing for the principles, the practice, the ethics, the guidelines for court annex, for private mediation, for cross-border mediation, everything, immunity, limitation, everything. It will come very soon.
You mentioned that social impact cases are not suited for mediation. Do you think that mediation could play a role in resolution of this, of trying to find alternative solutions to matters which are of social and historic nature, but like a minority? Take, for example, the trans community. They have always felt marginalized and they really don't feel like they have a voice. In such instances, when there is really no particular person, but a group of people, do you think mediation has a role to play?
Sorry, who are you talking about?
The transgender community or the LGBT community. I don't
know. I think there you need to focus on, you need a broad legal arm there very strongly. You need a judge and a court to get in there and emphasize the rules and the principles and notions of equality. You need that strength for the court to get in there and lay that foundation. Thereafter, I think you can use the more mediatory processes to kind of negotiate for better space, better facility, etc. But a strong legal foundation is an absolute must in cases like that. And I'm glad India has done that. Justice Sikri did it, in the Supreme Court. I don't know whether he's here. He said he might defend. But you need the strong arm of the law. I mean, I love it when the law can be strong, the courts can be strong, in defense of liberty, in defense of freedoms, in defense of equality. And that is our courts, that's our constitution. We should preserve it. We're lucky as a country. We should be lucky as a country. We should not give up what we have.
So do you think mediation should be made mandatory before going to court?
We have to approach that with caution. We must calibrate it. We can't suddenly one fine day say it should be mandatory. You must first build up the strength, the resources, make sure you have enough mediators of good enough quality, that there has been an adjustment in the mindset so that more and more lawyers realize that mediation is professional and become professional mediators, that lawyers engaging in mediation for clients realize that it's financially attractive. So you need those things to operate side by side before you can say, well, everything is mandatory. But sure, for a start, we can make some things mandatory and increase it later. But it's a multi-pronged process. and it should be calibrated carefully.
Lovely. Thank you so much for your very patient answers to all these questions. I really learned a lot and enjoyed this conversation. Ravi and Lekha, may I request you to take over? I just want to say thank you to BIC. Ravi, you have a fantastic team, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be part of this evening.
Thank you, Kamala. I must thank you for being, a very good interlocutor. My congratulations and thanks.
Thank you.
We really are fortunate to have a walkthrough of a work life and experience as gargantuan and rich as yours, Mr. Panchu. And your clarity and the stance that you take are nothing short of inspiring. Thank you for bringing such gentleness and common sense humanity to conflict resolution. Thank you, Kamala. We could not have asked for a better discussant. And I have to agree with you, Mr. Pancho is fast becoming all our most favorite person in the world.
Thank you,
everyone.
I was telling you that you are one of the most one of my most favorite people, and it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today. So I want to thank BIC for us to make this connect once again.
Thank you, Kamala. Thank you, everyone who tuned in as well. Good night, everyone, and see you next time.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye. Good night.